Okay, everyone, I'm going to try this one more time. You guys have no idea how long that this has. I've tried to get this uploaded. And again, I think it's the mood, the aura of, just going through a funeral right now, but I'm going to attempt this again. This is the last attempt. So whatever is coming out in this video is what's coming out in this video. So the first lecture I put up is the first half of chapter one. Chapter one obviously is entitled An Overview of Crime and Criminology. In that chapter, if you guys didn't really pick it up, we're going over definitions. We're going over terms that you should have picked up in your first CJ course, that you should have picked up in your sociology courses, etc. Right? So specifically, we went over the definition of criminology. What is that? We went over the definition of crime. What is that? Why is it so hard to define what is considered a crime and what is not considered a crime? We also went over criminality. In this specific second part of the first lecture, we're going to be starting off on the section entitled An Excursion Through the American Criminal Justice System. Okay, so we're just getting right into it. I'm obviously just going to begin and I'm going to share my screen. So an excursion through the American criminal justice system. With this section, our authors begin a discussion of talking about the process of becoming a legal criminal. Okay, the process of becoming a legal criminal is to follow the processing of felony from cases, right? Felony from cases from arrests to trials to wherever else that might take you beyond, right? The process is obviously going to vary in some specifics in states, but the principles underlying the specifics are uniform, right? So the specifics, the principles underlying the specifics, aka the foundations of the specifics, are uniform across states. Now, before someone can become a legal criminal, they have to be arrested. There needs to be a preliminary hearing. They need to go through a trial, an arraignment, a sentence has to be given out. That was given in no specific order, but we are going to go through all of this, right? So what is the definition of an arrest? Our book says that an arrest is when a person has been legally detained to answer criminal charges. Then he or she has been arrested. However, first, an arrest warrant needs to be given out and there needs to be probable cause. So an arrest warrant is an official document signed by a judge on the basis of evidence presented by law enforcement indicated that that person on the warrant is probably the one that committed the crime. Probable cause, on the other hand, means that the officer must possess a set of facts that would lead a reasonable person to conclude that the arrested person had committed the crime. That suspect then must be presented in court for the preliminary hearing before a magistrate or a judge at the earliest opportunity. Okay? I'll leave my thoughts out. I'm just going to try to get this out. But some of you did mention that there are flaws in the criminal justice system, specifically through hearings and things like that, and you are correct. However, it will work for certain people. It won't work for other types and things like that. So you guys definitely are aware that, systems work. And I think it was Jay, but just like any other system, like it could be education, it could be religion, it could be some kind of business. Systems work, certain systems work, and then there are a few things in those systems as well, or there are things in the systems as well that don't work. But just like any other system, the criminal justice system has its flaws, okay? So at the earliest convenience, a suspect must be presented in front of a magistrate or a judge. That suspect does have constitutional rights. So to advise suspects of their constitutional rights and the charges against them, that must be done, okay? There is no constitutional right, though, for bail. In fact, the suspect may be released on monetary bail on one's own recognizance, right? The traditional assumption of setting bail has been that bail is only designed to assure that a suspect's appearance is made at the next court date, okay? So again, going through the steps of becoming a legal criminal, right? Another step in that is the preliminary arraignment, right? Where this is a proceeding before a magistrate or a judge, which these three major matters have to be decided on: the actuality of a crime, reasonable grounds, and jurisdiction. Actuality of the crime should be common sense to most of us, even if you haven't taken a course in criminology. This is whether or not a crime has actually been committed. That's one matter that has to be decided on during the preliminary arraignment. Two is reasonable grounds. This is whether or not there are reasonable grounds to believe that the person before the bench, before the judge, committed the crime. That's the second matter that has to be decided on during the preliminary arraignment. And the third is jurisdiction, whether or not that crime was committed in the jurisdiction of the court. That is the last matter that has to be decided on during the preliminary arraignment. Now, the grand jury. Okay, so the grand jury, the investigatory jury, is composed of 7 to 23 citizens, before which the prosecutor presents evidence that sufficient grounds exist to actually try the suspect for a crime. Okay, the arraignment proceeding is also the first time defendants have had the opportunity to respond to the charges against them. Okay. Let's go down. That was the grand jury, the arraignment, the trial. A trial specifically is defined as an examination of the facts of the case by a judge or a jury for the purpose of reaching a judgment. Now, that judgment could be a sentence of whatever length or so, or probation. Our book specifically goes over probation, okay? A probation sentence is a suspended commitment to prison. So they are suspending your commitment of going through a lengthy prison sentence, or it doesn't have to be lengthy, but some form of a prison sentence, okay? And if at any time during your probationary period, you as an offender do not abide by the conditions of the probation, and those conditions can consist of a variety of things, right? You might actually face revocation of your probation and impose the original prison sentence, okay? Let's go over the role of probation officers, right? Probation officers must complete pre-sentence investigation reports, okay, which are known as PSIs. PSIs are reports that are prepared by probation officers and contain a variety of information about the crime and the offender. Okay, so specifically the offender's background. This can include like a criminal record, educational attainment in history, work history, whether or not that offender is married or single, and substance/drug abuse. It can even include like attitude and behavior. So if you gave somebody an attitude in the past and they never forgot, like they're digging into everyone you knew, they're digging into everyone who knew you, etc. Okay. Probation officers also give sentence recommendations, right? So on the basis of all of that information in the PSI report, probation officers can offer sentencing recommendations. The most important factors influencing these recommendations are the seriousness of the crime and also your criminal history, okay? Probation officers will also supervise and monitor the offender's behavior. So probation officers supervise and monitor behavior and assure that all conditions of the probation sentence are being met. Now, sometimes the role of a probation officer will sometimes overlap with that of a social worker. In fact, I oftentimes think of probation officers as a form or a type of social worker. They are officers, so I'm not even taking that away. You are an officer, but your roles also overlap with that of a social worker. If any of you are probation officers in the class, I would love to know your opinion on this. And I mean no disrespect by saying that your roles overlap with that as social worker. It's just that the paperwork that you guys go through, the things that you are monitoring, the things that you are supervising is very similar to that of a social worker. So if you know anyone who works with children or the elderly, it's very, very similar, okay? So conflicting roles. Probation officers function as both social workers and law enforcement officers. Sometimes conflicting roles which officers might find difficult to reconcile. So again, that's why I meant no disrespect. Our book definitely does our authors definitely do see the overlap when it comes to that, okay? If the sentence imposed for felony conviction is some form of incarceration, the judge has the option of sentencing the officer to the offender, not the officer, the offender to a state penitentiary, a county jail, or a county work release program. The latter two, so a county jail or a county work release program, are almost all the time or invariably imposed as supplements to probation orders, okay? You need to know the difference between probation and parole, and our book, the section entitled An Excursion Through American Criminal Justice System is going to do that at the end of that specific section. So parole is defined as a conditional release from prison granted to inmates prior to the completion of their sentence. An inmate is granted parole by an administrative body called a parole board, which decides for or against parole based on such factors such as inmate behavior while incarcerated and the urgency for the need of cell space. So even if they need cell space, you know. So once released on parole, parole officers whose job is almost identical to that of a probation officer will supervise parolees, okay? In many states, probation and parole officers are one and the same, okay? So if any of you, again, work in the area of probation or parole, are they the same in Massachusetts? Are they not? Do they overlap? Are they, distinctly different? Okay. But know the difference between probation and probation and parole. Okay. So the differences lie in supervision and in revocation. So when it comes to supervision, specifically, probationers are under the supervision of courts, whereas parolees are under the supervision of the State Department of Corrections, okay? Revocation, right? Revocation of not parole, but probation first, is a judicial function, whereas revocation of parole is an executive administrative function. One of the longest sections of your of chapter 1 is a short history of criminology. And the reason why I'm saying short is probably because it's much longer to me. And towards the end of that history in our chapter, you go into specifically my field, which is criminology, which is sociology mainly, and then criminology fits right into that, okay? So a short history of criminology, okay? Criminology obviously is a young discipline, although humans have probably been theorizing about crime and its causes, since they first made rules, since those rules were broken, since they observed people breaking them. Obviously, what I'm saying is that criminology has been here forever. Maybe not the title of criminology, that title is brand new, it's fairly new. But criminology has been here forever, for centuries, for decades, okay? What and how people thought about crime and criminals in the past was strongly influenced by what social and intellectual currents, social and intellectual people of their time were thinking, were doing. This is no less true of what and how modern criminologists think about crime and criminals, okay? So this section of the history of criminology is broken up into periods and eras and decades. The first one is the supernatural era. And I don't want you guys to think, whoa, like this is crazy. But again, criminology, our definitions, the way we theorize about it will change with the time. Okay, so we're going to go over the supernatural era, the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment period, the Renaissance period, etc. Okay, and all of these periods influence and have lingering remnants in our US criminal justice system, our ideas of criminology and crime today. Okay, so when I go through these, I want you guys to actually maybe pause the video and sit back and just think. This actually might be easier for those of you who have parents or grandparents from different countries, because I can pull out clear examples of how criminology in those specific countries have like pulled out from the supernatural era, have pulled out from the Renaissance period, etc. And that's not to say those of you who don't have parents who are born in the US can't pull these things out. But pause the video after every one of these and just think of examples, okay? So the first one is the supernatural era, right? So with the supernatural era, there are explanations for bad behavior. Okay, bad behavior in this sense, we're talking about explanations for like crime through talks of spirits and evil doings, etc. Explanations for bad behavior were often of a religious or spiritual nature when it came to the supernatural era. Okay, disastrous natural events were seen as a divine punishment for some form of a transgression, and criminals were considered to be possessed or possessed by evil spirits, possessed by demons. So the only way that you could do a crime, doesn't matter what a crime was because you were possessed, okay? Or if something happened to the land, it was because of some transgression of the people, okay? The standard of innocence for an accused person was the survival of some sort of ordeal that they were going through. Okay, if an accused person survived the ordeal, he or she during the supernatural era was considered obviously under God's protection, right? And therefore, if you're under God's protection and you've gone through this ordeal and you've survived it, you must be innocent, right? So again, like I said, pause, think about it. If you guys need help, because I'm not physically like lecturing in the class, here's an example, right? Think about criminology alongside, like the Salem witch trials. That's an example of the supernatural era, okay? You just pause and think about it, right? How did they go about considering you a legal criminal during the Salem witch trials, right? How were you considered a witch? Okay. let's go into the Renaissance period, right? So the Renaissance, or if you guys don't know, Renaissance just means rebirth, right? And so it refers to the rediscovery of thinking, of the thinking traditions of specifically the ancient Greeks. Okay, it began to mold human thinking away from the absolute authority of received opinion and towards modern scientific methods. Okay, and again, I mentioned the scientific method. Your book mentioned the scientific method at the beginning of chapter 1. So if you need to go back and review that, please do. So many believe that the human character and personality are transparent in physical appearances. Specifically during the Renaissance period, we are introduced to, I don't want to murk his name, but Giambattista del Porta. Giambattista del Porta, right, who developed a theory of human personality called, right, and this is also based on physical appearance, physiognomy, right, which claimed that the study of physical appearance, particularly of the face, could reveal much about a person's personality and even the person's character. Okay, so my face could tell you during the Renaissance period, you know, I'm going to commit a crime. Okay. Again, pause the video, right? Do we have remnants, or does our criminal justice system, right, have remnants of this kind of Renaissance period and us basing who's a criminal and who's not based on physical appearance? Okay. Let's move on to the Enlightenment period. Okay. So here are some like highlights, right? The Enlightenment period opened the door to the human mind. Enlightenment is associated with advances in math, in science, in reason, in dignity, and in worth, right? So it's pretty much exemplified by a concern in human rights. Okay. This concern led to reforms in the criminal justice system through Europe, a process given a major push by Cesar Beccari's work. Specifically, if you haven't ever read Cesar Beccari's work, specifically Crime and Punishment, you should. It's very, very interesting. But specifically, that book ushered in the so-called classical school. Okay. Your book will mention Steven Pinker, who is a Harvard psychologist, who argues that Enlightenment values are the core cause of progress and human flourishing that we experience today. Humanity is far less violent now than it was historically. Poverty is decreasing rapidly worldwide, and we are living longer, healthier, and happier lives because of enlightened thinking. Now, just because, again, pause. Do you see remnants of this? However, I also want to say that there is a 4th edition of this book that was pushed out, I believe, in December or in January. However, there might be a 5th because COVID has given a lot of people time to think, time to read up, time to enlighten themselves. Is this accurate? And the only reason I'm pausing here is I don't know if this is that accurate today as of, Friday. I don't know what today's date is, but we're in September, it's 2020. I don't know if this is accurate. Not that the Enlightenment period wasn't, but accurate today in terms of, humanity being far less violent. Poverty is decreased. I don't know if this has just changed within the last 6 months, but that's just me. Okay. Has there been a spike in violence since March? And I'm saying since March because that's when things shut down, and like things really hit the fan economically. And the reason why I'm again stopping here is because poverty, if you've ever taken a sociology class with me, poverty will, wherever there's poverty, there's going to be a spike in violence. And again, I'm not saying that people are inherently violent. When your stomach is rumbling and you are constantly hungry, you will do whatever you need to do to feed yourself and to feed your family. Okay? And there's theories behind that, and we will get to the section on theories. Okay? But it's just something that slide was just something to think about. Okay? The Industrial Revolution and the age of science. Okay? This period, we saw the harnessing of the forces of nature to build and to operate the great machines that drove the Industrial Revolution and the strides made in biology, specifically by Charles Darwin's work on evolution. Criminology saw the beginning of the so-called positive school during this period, where positive scholars attempted to explain human behavior scientifically, and the veins of chemists and physicians, or not physicians, physicists, using science to explain the physical world. The basic idea behind specifically phrenology was that cognitive and personality functions are located in the brain, and that parts of the brain, specifically parts of the brain regulating the most dominant functions are bigger, whereas the ones that are less dominant are smaller. The biggest impact during this period, however, was made by Cesar Lombroso, whose theory of atavism, aka, were people born criminals? So this came out of this period, right? And if you think of Charles Darwin, right, when we think of Charles Darwin, a lot of us think of survival of the fittest. But also, right, when it comes to survival of the fittest, those who are more well prepared make it. So when it comes to Lombroso's theory, there are certain individuals, just like those, Darwin is saying that those who are more fit will make it. Those who are more equipped are going to make it. Lombroso are saying that those who are born certain ways are going to commit certain crimes. Okay, they're born that way. Okay, I would also say, for those of you who are in my sociology class, that this is a very functional way of thinking. Okay, I'll explain that a little later on in the semester though. The progressive era is the next one, right? So this is an era of liberal efforts to bring about social reforms as unions, women, and other disadvantaged groups of people who struggled for recognition. Criminology largely turned away from what was disparaged as biological determinism, which implied that nothing could be done to reform criminals, to cultural or social determinism. It was during this period that sociology became the disciplinary home of sociology, of criminology, okay? So here it's during the progressive era that, criminology gets housed under sociology, okay? So it's also during this period that the so-called structural theories of crime, such as the Chicago School of Social Ecology, was formulated. Here we have the formulation of anomie and strain theory by Robert Merton, which was another structural cultural theory that emerged somewhat later. Okay, so pause, again, think. I don't know if I did that pause and think thing, the last one, but make sure you go back and do that. Pause and think, right? We're veering away during this time from the biological thinking of the Industrial Revolution. Link the Industrial Revolution with Charles Darwin, okay, even Emile Durkheim, okay? So we're veering away from that Okay, that school of thought during the Industrial Revolution, nothing can be done. Criminals are born criminals. Here during the Progressive Era, like they can be reformed. They're not born criminals. There's something else that's going on. Your book doesn't necessarily go into it, but there's something else. They can be um, reformed. Remember, they're going away from that biodeterminist view. Okay. The critical period, and we're almost done with this section, right? So the critical period, there is civil unrest. So because of the later parts of this period was a time of great civil unrest in the United States, it also saw the emergence of several theories, such as conflict theory by Karl Marx and conflict theory by Max Weber, okay? These were highly critical, especially of American society. Okay. Perhaps in response to these theories, and perhaps because of a new conservative mood in the United States, theories with the classical taste for free will and rationality embedded in them reemerged. Okay. When we think of conflict theory, everybody wants to go to Karl Marx, and everybody thinks of Marxists as being, negatives and Debbie Downers, and just not the American way. And I want you to think beyond that. Okay. Being critical of something does not mean that you are against it. And that's a weird way of, I see a lot of people thinking that way this in 2020. And again, one of you mentioned this on Flipgrid, and I think it is, I think it was Cam. Okay. And those Flipgrids really helped me to really know your names. So thank you for doing them if you did them. But I think it was Cam, like how people can't struggle and debate with each other without just being like black and white, and things like that. And that oftentimes, that came a lot with the critical period as well as with the progressive era. Okay, so pause and think, do you see reminiscences of this in, criminology today in 2020, criminal justice today in 2020? The last one, so the modern period, right? You'll have here biosocial theories and past decades, right? The modern theory witnessed a resurgence in biosocial theories. These theories view behavior as the result of biological factors interacting with the past and present environments. During the past decade, biosocial research into the causes of crime has expanded exponentially, and the findings derived from such research have contributed immensely to our understanding of the causes and solutions that we have in regards to crime. Pause and think, etc. Okay. So the last, I think it's the last couple of slides, maybe not actually. So we still have quite a bit to go. Not quite a bit to go, but I'm going to try to get through it as fast as I can. But the second to last section is the role of theory in criminology. So here you need to know what theory is. How is it defined? When I have been saying theory throughout this lecture, throughout the first one, throughout the second one, what is theory? What does it mean? So theory making is all about trying to grasp how the known factors related to a phenomenon such as crime are linked together in a non-coincidental way to produce an effect, okay? Criminologists are interested in finding out factors that cause criminal behavior, okay? The first step in a long chain of things, right? So the first step in a long chain leading to the detection of causes is to discover correlates related to the phenomenon of specific interest. When we consistently find correlations, it's very tempting to assume something causal is going on. When we find correlations, oftentimes we want to be like, that causes the other thing. That is why that other thing happened. And I want to steer you clear of that, okay? Correlation does not establish causation at all, okay? Resisting the tendency to jump to causal conclusions from correlation is the first lesson of statistics. Establishing causal connections between and among correlates is a business of theory. So what's theory? Okay. A theory is a set of logically interconnected propositions explaining how observed facts within the domain of interest are related and from which a number of hypotheses can be derived and tested. Okay, the word theory tends to have different meaning for scientists and members of the general public. We have our own like I will say all the time, we have our own definitions of things. It is in the best interest of us as criminologists to know what our specific definition is. Okay, so for the general public, the word theory will oftentimes to them mean, oh, I have a hunch. Oh, I have a guess. Okay. In science, however, this is absolutely not the case. Okay. In science, you know, like again, we use the scientific method. Okay. So in science, a series of statements that can be logically deduced from the theory called hypothesis, which are statements about relationships between and among factors we expect to find based on the logic of theories, is what a theory is. Okay. It's very wordy, but your book has a like more succinct and concise definition. Okay. What is a good theory? Okay. Within criminology, there is no one true or right theory where we are competing. Okay. We're all competing. Okay. All theories have a kernel of truth to them, right? But not all theories are created equal. And we have to keep that in mind. Ellis, Hartley, and Walsh summarized 4 criteria for judging the merits of a theory, and those are predictive accuracy, predictive scope, simplicity, and falsifiability. Okay. Make sure, and I'm not going to go through it in this lecture because I know I'm running over 30 minutes. So God bless those of you who can get through this 30-minute one. Okay. So how to think about theories, okay? A level of analysis is that segment of the phenomenon of interest that is measured and analyzed. To span different levels of analysis, we have to understand how factors included in different levels interact, how each is both affected and affects each other, in other words, okay? Whew. The last section, I keep on saying the last, it's not the last section, but almost the last section. Ideology of criminological theory, okay? So make sure you know the difference and the similarities between ideology and theory. Your book will go over those definitions. Make sure you know the similarities and the differences. Ideology is a way of looking at the world, a general emotional picture of how things should be, okay? A criminological theory is at least partly shaped by ideology. Those who feel drawn to a particular theory owe a great deal of their attention to it, to the fact that they share the theory's vision. Criminology, however, is slowly moving towards the realization that criminal behavior must be examined at all levels, from neurons to neighborhoods, if it is ever to come to terms with the whole. Okay, according to the economist and philosopher Thomas Sowell, 2 contrasting visions have shaped thoughts about human nature throughout history, and these visions are in constant conflict with one another. The constrained vision, which says this is how the world is, and the unconstrained vision with this is how the world should be. Okay. The last section, official last section of the book, is all about connecting criminological theory and social policy. Scientists are primarily concerned with gaining knowledge for its own sake. They are only secondarily concerned with how useful the knowledge may be to practitioners and policy makers. Conversely, policymakers are less concerned with hypothesized causes of a problem and more concerned with what can be done about the problem that is politically, practically, and financially feasible. Policy is simply a decided course of action designed to solve a selected problem from among alternative courses of action. Policy choices, are at the bottom value choices, and as such, only those policy recommendations that are ideologically palatable are likely to be implemented in the United States. Connecting problems with solutions is very tricky. It's a very, very tricky business in all areas of government policy making. But nowhere is it more difficult than in the area of criminal justice. So it's I don't want to end this PowerPoint on a negative note. However, the chapter does end it kind of, right? On a negative note. It's hard. It's going to be hard to change the criminal justice system, no matter how flawed we see things, right? No matter how many things we define as citizens, as civilians, as unjust, okay? It's hard. Your textbook, your authors who work in criminology are telling you this, right? Things need to be palatable. Like all areas of bodies within the criminal justice system have to be willing to take this stuff in, okay, to change it, okay? And that's difficult to change. They're not saying it's impossible. And as a sociologist, again, we touch on criminology. I will never say things are destined to stay the same forever. I will say that they are hard to change because even in sociology, poverty, which is a social issue, is difficult to change. The education system that we have today is difficult to change. Okay, so the same thing goes for the criminal justice system and criminology. That's not to say it won't, because, I think it's Joshua, who is the military officer in our class, says things are changing fast. And I think faster within these past couple of months, very, very fast, so we haven't seen them in the form of policy change yet, but I think that they will change for the better in the long run, hopefully, okay? So I wanna end with that. I'm not gonna waste your time right now. And I'm sorry for all the stuttering again, English isn't my first language. But yeah, I hope you guys understood it. And again, I'm kind of in a weird mindset right now and I have to get ready for a week. So have a blessed day today. And this is part 2 of chapter 1. So bye guys. I will see you, and I will definitely have uploaded for you chapter 2 probably on Monday. So sometime Monday afternoon. Sound good? Whew. Bye guys.